I'm Sue O'Connell. Tonight on Greater Boston, two legal scholars join me to break down the dozens of criminal charges former President Donald Trump was arraigned for earlier in a Manhattan courtroom and where the case against him could go from here. Then later,
people ask, what was the American strategy? The Americans did not have a strategy.
An inside look into the nearly 20-year-long Afghanistan war and the tumultuous U.S. exit that left the country vulnerable to a Taliban takeover from the new FRONTLINE series, America and the Taliban. It was both historic and incredibly routine when a Manhattan judge read Donald Trump the 34 charges against him of falsifying business records in the first degree, and then the former president pled not guilty to all 34. After the arraignment, the court unsealed the official indictment in the case, which details each count in which Trump allegedly falsified records with, quote, intent to defraud and intent to commit another crime and aid and conceal in the commission of that crime. So what exactly is that crime? The charges don't specify, though we know it's all in relation to alleged hush money payments made to adult film star Stormy Daniels ahead of the 2016 election in order to keep her quiet about an alleged affair, which Trump still denies. Though it does list a series of documents Trump is charged with falsifying, including vouchers, checks, business ledgers for Trump himself and a trust in his name, as well as several invoices from his former attorney, Michael Cohen, who previously pled guilty to his role in the hush money scandal and served more than a year in prison. Joining me now to help us understand what we've learned from the unsealed indictment are Northeastern law professor and GBH News legal analyst Daniel Medwed and Western New England University law professor Jennifer Taub, who is also the author of this great book, Big Dirty Money: The Shocking Injustice and Unseen Cost of White-Collar Crime. Welcome to both of you. Jennifer, I want to start with you. What's your hot take on what you have seen so far?
My hot take is that if you want to see the action, you've got to look at the statement of facts. The indictment is very sparse. It just lists 34 counts, almost verbatim quoting from the relevant New York statute. But if you want to see the sort of, we talk about talking indictments, this is a talking statement of facts that gives the full context and more details about what the theory of the case actually is.
And Daniel, how about you? What's your hot take?
Two hot takes, Sue. The first is a lot of people are talking about how this is political. It's not. Alvin Bragg did not indict Donald Trump. Grand jurors did. Regular citizens in New York issued this indictment, between 16 and 23 people. The second hot take is a lot of other people are saying how novel the legal theory is behind this case. It's not. There have been something like, and Jennifer might have a better handle on this than I do, something like 29 prosecutions for falsifying business records in the first department, which is the region of New York that covers Manhattan and the Bronx, just since 2009. So this isn't a new case, and it's not necessarily as political as some people would want folks to believe.
So just to set the table for folks at home, the 34 listings here, it's not 34 different crimes, right, Jennifer?
Well, technically, it's 34 instances of the same type of crime.
So he probably should have paid with one check instead of 34 checks.
Well, it turns out that, yeah, it's not just what's really interesting that you find out when you look at the statement of facts is it wasn't just the reimbursement of Michael Cohen plus paying sort of a true up. So he didn't have to pay taxes on that as income. There was also a payment to a doorman as well. So there's a lot in here if you take a look at it. But yeah, he would have been better off actually telling the truth and documenting these payments properly. I have to say, though, I'm not sure there's any way that the Trump organization could have lawfully made these payments because, as you know, corporations cannot make direct campaign contributions, even after Citizens United.
And Daniel, I want to dig into that a little bit, just so folks understand that the campaign, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the campaign contribution here is that Michael Cohen fixed the problem with the money of Stormy Daniels. Like sometimes if you pay for a restaurant for a fundraiser for your favorite candidate, that actually you're not supposed to do either. So the campaign violation here is the fixing. Am I right on that?
Yeah, that's the operating assumption here. What's really interesting, and this goes to Jennifer's point about how bare bones the indictment is, Sue, is this crime, falsifying business records in the first degree in New York. It's a felony, and it basically has two components to it. You have to intend to defraud someone by falsifying a record, and also do that in order to either perpetrate or conceal some other crime. Now, most of us, and Jennifer, I wonder what your take is on this, assume that that other crime is something related to campaign finance. Right? Maybe a federal crime, maybe not, but we don't know. But technically, there's nothing in the indictment about campaign finance crimes, right?
Jennifer, what do you think?
It's interesting. Well, I agree. I was thinking, and I'm glad to see it, that this is more about tax evasion, and you see some hints of that in the statement of facts. But yet, you also see what's complicated here is yes, the sort of harm to the public is interfering in the campaign, and we definitely see that in the statement of facts. And so I think the danger, that the DA faces is being a DA, county DA, in charge of enforcing state law. And the question is, can one of the underlying felonies that is being furthered or concealed be a federal crime? And I think in addition, I think the answer to that is, I think so, we'll see. And then in addition to that, there is the tax evasion. But what seems very clear in the statement of facts is one of the crimes they believe Donald Trump was furthering the crimes for which Michael Cohen, his lawyer, already served prison time, as well as the deferred prosecution agreement with AMI, the owner of the National Enquirer. I mean, this stuff is really interesting. Despite my disappointment about how thin the indictment was, the statement of facts really spins out of my mind a lot of different possible theories here.
Jennifer, I want to stay with you for a second. A number of people I know who own businesses or are CEOs have been poo-pooing this before seeing it, before it was unsealed, saying like, well, sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we pay lawyers for things. We don't know what the lawyers are doing. Our accountant sometimes says you should do this, and we don't know if we're supposed to do it. That's why we hire an accountant. And making the argument that it's hard to run a business, and often we make directional mistakes, I think is how one person said it to me. And on its face, if I were just a layperson looking at this, it would look to me from the indictment, not the statement of facts, that this is just directionally, he paid some guy to do something, but he didn't know what he was doing, and now he's getting in trouble. You're shaking your head no, so what?
There is evidence of, according to the statement of facts, that Donald Trump was directing this whole thing, and also even, in fact, telling Michael Cohen, hold off on paying Stormy Daniels till after the campaign, and then we can stiff her. I mean, come on. Like, this is not, oh my goodness, I was paying my lawyer, and instead of doing legal work for me, he was off at a casino, or he was doing, paying to re-renovate his house. I had no idea. No, that's not this case.
So, Daniel, let's talk about the punishment. Let's just posit that, this is going to be a long case. Everyone should probably buckle their seatbelts. This is not going to be resolved by the end of the week. I'm hearing some people say a year and a half. Other things are going to come down the pike, most likely. But let's just say Donald Trump is convicted on these charges. Will he see jail time? Do people traditionally see jail time for this type of crime?
Yes, Sue. So these are, the 34 counts are all felonies, and they're all what are called E-felonies, which is the lowest felony in New York. I used to be a criminal defense lawyer in New York, and the sentencing range on those is often 1 1/3 years to 4 years in prison. Here, it's possible, in theory, that some of these could be what are called consecutive sentences because they are separate crimes on separate dates. So it's quite possible that he could get sentenced to a term of years in prison, and it could be, again, theoretically, quite significant.
So, Jennifer, what are the next steps in terms of what we in the public find out? I know that there's a lot of conversation about how Trump is going to handle this, and I know he was, I'm going to say, chastised by the judge regarding his behavior and the things that he's been saying on social media in terms of threatening people, and there's a concern there, which I hope we have time to get to. But what will we learn? Will each side give us a narrative of what the charges are and what they mean and what their defenses and their prosecution will be, or are we just going to have to sit tight and wait for the trial?
I think there's a third choice, which is one side. I think Donald Trump's side is going to spin this however they want to. But one thing I think we should look for procedurally is I expect, now that the arraignment has happened, that under New York criminal procedure, we will see the defense challenge the indictment, right, on sufficiency grounds, as well as some defect in the grand jury. We're going to see that. I think if they lose that challenge, they just have to wait till the end of trial. I don't think there's any sort of interlocutory intervening appeal. So we're going to see some, machinations, maybe some things like that. But I imagine Donald Trump is going to do what Donald Trump does best, which is, raise money and waste money. And he's going to, continue to try to raise money off of this. Nevertheless, I think it hurts his candidacy, but he'll continue to run. And we know someone's run for president from prison before. And, life will just continue along in this sort of bizarre way that it has for the last, 7 years.
I think that's great. Thanks, Jennifer. I'm just going to leave now. That was a very optimistic. All right, so Daniel, a lot of folks have talked about the idea that it's not impossible to find a jury who can sit on this, that we all through our history and in small towns and big towns alike, small crimes, big crimes, we find a jury of our peers. It's not that you don't have to know Donald Trump or even dislike or like Donald Trump. You just have to be impartial. So we'll posit that as something we're sure can happen. But there's been concern expressed about how Donald Trump is threatening the district attorney, threatening the legal system, and a concern of someone on the grand jury or someone who is picked to be on the jury. What can our institutions do to protect folks from the distrust they may have for Trump's legal team or for Trump himself?
In terms of juror security, anonymity is going to be the key to make sure that everyone who's impaneled for the jury is anonymous and no one knows who they are. So in fact, that they can speak their minds without fear or favor. That's the only way this process could work. And your point's very well taken, Sue, which is I think we can find 12 fair and impartial citizens to serve on this jury. Donald Trump is going to try to move this. I think there'll probably be a change of venue motion. He'll try to move this trial outside of Manhattan, maybe to a different county in New York. Years ago, back when I was practicing in New York, the infamous case involving Amadou Diallo, who was shot and killed in the Bronx, New York police officers were charged with that crime and it was moved to Albany. So sometimes with these really high-profile cases, they can be moved to a different county. I suspect he'll try to do that. But it's very hard to get a case moved, and I think we'll find 12 fair and impartial jurors.
Jennifer, obviously, we'll say it because I actually got on the whole cast without saying it. This is unprecedented. We have a former president who has been criminally charged. But at the same time, it's Donald Trump, who is a businessman who has been skirting the law, skirting the norms in his private and professional life for decades, if not since the moment he was born. And these charges, although associated, we think, to his campaign, I imagine there are other things that you're reading about that they have been charged with. We've got Trump University in the past. We've got, we could go on and on about the professional things that he did that skirted the law and caused lawsuits. So having said all that, is this a warning to other business people, to other powerful CEOs who or CFOs who may feel that they are above the law, that you're not, and you should pay attention to the law when you are doing your bookkeeping and other things?
I would hope so. And I hope that this enlightens folks on how common a charge this can be at the state level. I think most of us, at least because I study white collar crime, I mostly focus on federal offenses, right? But I think it's really important also to be aware of the laws in your, in local jurisdictions, and to understand that, county prosecutors are serious about protecting the public and protecting the taxpayers from fraud.
Daniel, as we wrap up, is this evidence that the system holds?
I think that's the hope here, right? That no one is above the law and that someone should face the music for crimes that are, in fact, sufficient based on a grand jury assessment to go to trial. I think that's a sign that maybe our system is up to the task. We'll see.
In the words of Donald Trump, we'll see. The one thing I quote him on all the time. All right. Jennifer Taub, Daniel Medwed, thanks so much for joining us on your spot hot takes. I'm sure you'll be digging in and joining us in the future. I appreciate your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Bye-bye.
Next up, after the last American planes took off from Afghanistan, marking the end of the United States' nearly two-decade-long war, the Taliban quickly took back control of the country, following a chaotic and much criticized American withdrawal. That left more than a dozen American service members dead and left behind many more Afghan contractors who risked their lives to help the U.S. The decisions that led to the fraught exit and the state of Afghanistan today is the focus of a new three-part docuseries from FRONTLINE, featuring interviews with both U.S. and Taliban officials.
Why should the United States trust you?
موږ متحده ایالاتو سره د شل کال جنگ کړی او دا موږ ثابت کړی چې موږ څه وایو هغه کوو او دوی باید دا مورد درک کړي.
I have come to Afghanistan to meet and interview numerous Taliban officials. Many have never spoken before. This is the story of how they won the war.
دا ساحه ټول جنگ ساحه د منطقو کې هغوی به هوایي بریدونه کول مجاهدین به څومره شهیدانېدل خو دوی به په شهادتونو باندې مجاهدینو کې کوم مشکل نه راپېښېده او راوتي د شهادت په تمناسب.
The series is called America and the Taliban. I'm now joined by the interviewer we just saw in that clip, Martin Smith, the series correspondent, producer, and director. Martin, welcome. Congratulations. What an extraordinary docuseries. I was both saddened and thrilled to watch it. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. And yes, it's a very sad story. Can't get around that.
When was the first time that you were in Afghanistan?
Let's see. Right after 9/11, I went into the Pakistan tribal areas just over the border from Afghanistan. Didn't go into Afghanistan on that trip, and I think then, like the rest of America, I got distracted by Iraq for a few years. Then I was back in there in 05, 06, and then again in 09 and 10, 11. So more trips than I can remember or want to remember, frankly.
And when
but I do have a certain love for the country.
Yeah, that's evident, and it's also clear in the amount of trust that you were able to build up with your subjects in Afghanistan. When you returned this time, how would you portray what's happening there in terms of what you may have had for expectations at the beginning of the war? Is it, it seems a lot of the folks you talk to are the jaded sort of, well, here we are, things are still terrible, except instead of the Americans, we've got the Taliban or the Taliban again. What was your experience of where they are now?
The first question I asked after landing and was on my way to my hotel, I asked the driver and fixer that was with me, I said, so how do people feel about what's going on here? And they said, well, look, they're happy the war is over and they have more security. They're very uncertain about the Taliban. They're uncertain where the red lines are, and they're uncertain about the future. And many of them really dislike the Taliban, and they let you know that. So it's a mixed bag. It's peaceful, but it's uncertain and unclear.
How were you able to build the trust that you did both with the Taliban in terms of negotiating where you were going to go and who you were going to talk to, and also with the people who live there? In one episode, you actually talked to someone who you talked to years ago in the exact same spot that you talked to him years ago. Is that a general feeling of trust that folks are having, or what did you do to build that?
Well, you'd have to ask them what I did to build their trust in us. But, you know, I've been going back and forth. I have a certain amount of knowledge about Afghanistan, and that counts for something if you're asking questions that make sense to people. You know, I would say by and large, especially the officials, the top officials that we spoke to, were very pleased to gloat about their victory. Understandably, they beat yet again a superpower. First the British twice, the Russians once, and us now. So they were happy to have us into their offices to talk about what they'd accomplished. It's human nature.
As we mentioned, it's a three-part series. In the first part, which is airing now, you go back and take a look at the sort of the origins, not the all the way to the back origin stories of Afghanistan, but the most recent era origin story, and also what happened after America entered the picture this time round. I'm going to show a clip from the series talking about the decisions that the U.S. and UN leaders made to not include the Taliban officials in the decisions about the future of the country.
In my own post-mortem of why didn't things turn out better in Afghanistan, one of the questions that lingers, that hangs over this, is why we did not actually try to incorporate the Taliban into the new Afghanistan.
In the 20-year history of this war, if there was an opportunity to prevent the Taliban's insurgency from gathering force and disrupting the American and NATO project in Afghanistan, that was probably the moment.
Martin, you do make the point as well, or it gets made in the docuseries. We were also very fresh from the 9/11 attacks. Is that hindsight just the gift of hindsight, or was there really a botched effort there in not inviting the Taliban to the table?
You're absolutely right that we were running on high emotion after 9/11 with the attacks in New York and Washington, and it made sense to almost everybody that we should go in there and with guns blazing and take out the Taliban who had given sanctuary. Let's be clear, the Taliban were not, there were no Afghans on the planes on 9/11. And there was no evidence that they helped plan those attacks, but they had given sanctuary to Osama bin Laden, and he was already someone who was attacking the U.S., notably in East Africa and in Yemen. So the idea of having them at the table was anathema to many people in the government. But on the other hand, there were some that thought, well, you know, it is customary after a war to invite the vanquished to sit down at the table and have a role. And, you know, the Taliban wanted to have a role. They wanted to be heard. They've now gotten that role. It's just not the role that we imagined.
I want to now play a clip talking about the challenges that are happening now when it comes to who are the people targeted.
One thing I'm not agree, that the target was the civilian.
September 5th, 2019, Taliban car bomb in Kabul kills 10 Afghan civilians. Another car bombing outside an Afghan military base in Pul-e-Alam, Logar province, kills 4 Afghans. In the span of a week, 24 Americans are killed, 107 Afghan civilians.
But who is the target here? Yeah,
well, if you go into a marketplace because there's a couple of soldiers and you set off a car bomb, it's going to kill women and children and innocent civilians.
This was fighting.
What did you learn about where the priorities are for folks who are in danger?
Well, as you see, as he points out, this was fighting. In other words, they didn't care to hide the fact that many innocent civilians were going to be killed. It was a Taliban tactic to use suicide bombs, and some of them quite large, I mean, truck bombs that could destroy whole buildings or whole, you know, half of a village. And it took out a lot of innocent people. And they were quite, you know, seemingly comfortable with that.
One of the things that folks have paid a lot of attention to, rightly so, is the status of women and girls in Afghanistan, and also the challenges of the daily living of food and safety, water. What's the status right now for just the everyday person who lives there, and the status of women?
Well, the situation with women, as it's pretty well reported, is that girls past puberty are not allowed to go into school. So past the 6th grade, basically, there is no education for girls and no education for young women in universities. Women are supposed to not go outside without a male escort. They're supposed to wear a full burqa, full covering. Now, they don't all obey that. And in the cities, you see women who are in defiance of those rules. And they aren't generally arrested, but they can be, and sometimes are. So that's a pretty grim situation. As far as lack of food and water, those things are conditions that have plagued Afghanistan for decades. And even under the American occupation, there were clinics that were serving malnourished children. It's gotten worse under the Taliban. And the Taliban told me that that was a matter that God had to solve, and that they didn't really care about those things. It was that's not all the Taliban feeling that way, but that was one governor in Helmand province who told me, when I asked him about the lack of work, the lack of health care, and women complaining, he said, well, we don't care about those things.
Yeah, there's something to be said for the transparency and honest answers to questions that you have been getting from the Taliban leaders there. I can't recommend it enough, Martin Smith. America and the Taliban. It's a 3-part series. Frontline, of course, extraordinary work. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Frontline's America and the Taliban premieres tonight at 10 right here on GBH2 and online at pbs.org/frontline, the Frontline YouTube page, and on PBS app. That's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Sue O'Connell. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Wait, did I just commit a crime? Hey folks, I'm Edgar B. Harwick III from GBH's Curiosity Desk, where you ask questions and I find answers. Today's question comes courtesy of Betty Davis from Gloucester, Massachusetts, who wants to know, is it in fact a crime to remove these labels? Now, you find these guys on pillows, mattresses, even a lot of winter coats, and the reason why is because you cannot see what is inside of those items. Now, today, pillows, for example, are usually stuffed with feathers or cotton or some kind of synthetic material. But according to Maggie Terry, back in the day, they put some pretty gnarly stuff in the stuffing.
I mean, it used to be years ago, they'd throw anything they wanted to into the bedding. Newspapers, dirty rags.
Horsehair, used hospital or hotel mattresses, corn husks.
Sweepings off the floor, part of their lunches, droppings, I mean, anything.
For starters, that's disgusting. And furthermore, it's dangerous and unhealthy. So today, a lot of states require these labels that tell you what is inside of the item. And it is against the law to remove them. Sort of. Retailers and manufacturers can be fined if they remove the labels, but once you buy it or I buy it, if you read closely, most of these end with the line, except by the consumer. So there you have it. Feel free to rip away. Don't forget to follow and tell us what you are curious about, because hey, I might just look into it for you. I'm Edgar B. Harwick III. Stay curious out there.